We gather in reverence before the wonder of life, the wonder of this moment, the wonder of being together, so close, yet so far apart. Each hidden in our own secret chamber, each listening, each trying to speak, yet none fully understanding, none fully understood. We gather in reverence before all intangible things the eyes see not, nor ears can detect, that hands can never touch, that space cannot hold, and time cannot measure. Words of Sophia Leon Falls. We welcome you to our congregation, Community Church Unitarian Universalist congregation. We gather in person and virtually in these unaccustomed times. Our purpose is to form a community to practice and advance a free and responsible search for truth and meaning as a progressive, open-minded, and inclusive religious community. We believe we do not need to think alike to love alike. Ours is a faith in action as we do the work of justice and compassion in our quest to live ethically, recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of all persons. We welcome those who come in the spirit of love. We welcome you here this morning. We light the chalice this morning. If you would join in singing in your home, in your private chambers, the words that you may know. I had one message I meant to share with you. Please turn to your email that you receive, Community Manners, every Friday to get the messages. But I also wanted to tell you that because we've been holding virtual classes for membership and signing people to the virtual book, we need to actually sign them to the real book. And so please, if you would email us at ccunola.org. Let us know you'd like to sign the book because you're already a member. Then we can make an appointment to meet you either after
I can do hard things
or whenever you can come by, maybe even during the day. Just email us. We need to get all of those signatures in the book. Our speaker this morning is Reverend Justin McCreary. He serves the UU Church of Jackson, Mississippi, a place that we both hold dear. He has agreed to help us out every fourth Sunday during this time while we're in transition. So we are very grateful to Justin, and we appreciate the UU community helping us out in this difficult time. At this time, Cynthia Ramirez has the time for all ages.
Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to remind you too of the UU crew of Kids for Change, where your change makes change. So if you have any change in your pocket or any change you have around the house, please donate it to the crew of Kids for Change. It's going to one of the homeless organizations. All the information was on the in Community Matters, and you can do it virtually also. But if you're in the church, you can come, and this is the little float they made, and has a bucket. So throw all your change in that. So thank you so much. So today I'm going to show you a video. It's a nice little story about I can do hard things.
Mindful Affirmations for Kids by Gabby Garcia. I don't always feel brave, confident, or strong. Sometimes it's easier to follow others along. I get so many messages about how I should be. Pulled in different directions, I feel wobbly. When this happens, I listen for that quiet voice inside. And when I pay attention, that voice is my guide. I connect with the love and strength it brings. It helps me remember I can do hard things. I can be a friend to myself. I can feel all my feelings. I can ask for help. It's okay. I can try again rather than give up. I can believe in myself. I can speak up when it would be easier to stay quiet. And I can say no, even to my friends. I can apologize, say sorry. I can also forgive. I can listen and understand different points of view. I can care for my community. I can choose kindness. I can practice peace. I can share my gifts with the world. I can be myself. Hard things can be about what we think, feel, say, or do. What's hard for me may not be hard for you. You are you, and I am me. We walk through the world differently. Trusting my voice helps me find my way. I grow braver and stronger every day. The tough stuff I face is all my own, but I can also remember I'm not alone. I'm ready for the hard things I have to do. And please remember, so are you. You can do anything you put your mind to, even the hard things. We hope you loved the book.
Reading this morning is from the back of the hymnal number 601, and all the people. When all the people of the world love, then the strong will not overpower the meek. The many will not oppress the few. The wealthy will not mock the poor. The honored will not disdain the humble. The cunning will not deceive the simple. Motzi, the Buddhist writing. I don't get to leave quite yet. It is at this time in the service that we think about how much our congregation means to us and how it is that we support it. These are hard times. They've been hard for you, they're hard for churches. We lose members, we lose supporters because they've lost jobs. It's just a difficult time. So if you are in a position that you can help us, that would be wonderful. Community Unitarian Universalist Church is a self-sustaining congregation. The generosity of its members and friends enables the congregation to fulfill its purpose in doing the sacred work of bringing justice, spirituality, and compassion to our community and beyond. You can make your donations online at ccuunola.org/stewardship. You can just go to that site and scroll down, and there's a place where it says make a pledge. And if you click on that, it actually says a one-time donation, and you can do it that way. Or by texting 504-370-2659, enter give, and you'll be prompted. You can also mail a check, of course, to this address, 6690 Florida Lee Drive, New Orleans, 70124. The congregation, which isn't here, is always invited to put something in the bowl. Everyone's support is deeply appreciated. At this time in our service, we normally continue to weave together the fabric of our community as we take an opportunity to share a joy or a sorrow with one another. Unless someone here has a joy or a sorrow they'd wish to share, perhaps we could just spend a moment in quiet meditation, appreciating this community that sustains us and holds us together. We're recording this, so we don't have a way to get your messages at this time.
It's always exciting to be at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Community Church in New Orleans. And it was good timing this week coming up because we had to get king cakes to go home. We've got orders that we've got to fulfill. So after this service, I will be heading over to start buying king cakes. It was also exciting that Jacqueline was leading worship with me today. We have a history together in a place, and a place that we both loved and called home, and I still have the opportunity to call home. So I'm very thankful to be here today. My reading is from Dylan Thomas. Do not go gentle into that good night. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words have forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight and learned too late, they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my Father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. I seldom talk about my personal theology in UU pulpits. There are a few important reasons for that, one of which is my personal theology doesn't express the abundance of Unitarian Universalist thought. And then the fact that UUs are encouraged to search. Second, UUs are encouraged to search for truth in my theology and is an expression of truth from my perspective. But there is also a third reason. Once I address my theology, it is locked in a way that is in itself in conflict with my theology. Put simply, if I tell you too deeply what I believe, you will assume that is always what I believe, when in fact it fluctuates and changes, sometimes depending on the hour. Instead, what I often do is view the world through my theology and talk about the world through that lens. But in this context, and with this sermon, I felt it important to share a little. We are in a constant state of flux that drifts towards something akin to entropy. No matter how well a system is ordered, it will always drift to disorder. Which is why I can't keep my desk organized. I have to constantly keep up with my desk. You should see it. My desk becomes unusable because the natural state of these empty spaces is to be filled. I'm going to call that chaos. Let's just go with chaos. The natural state is to return to chaos, not to create it. Chaos in itself is primordial. It makes up all the elements necessary to generate the ego or the self. My role in the world then is to utilize the primordial chaos as raw material for creation. You may notice that up to this point, I have not mentioned order. And that is because order is not the point. The point is to dance between chaos and order, using that primordial chaos to create beauty. Don't misunderstand me. This is not about good and evil. It's about raw material. Order over equilibrium cannot be equated with a moral good, while chaos cannot be equated with a moral evil. The other very important thing to point out is that this is not happening in isolation. In the same way, two particles are always bouncing off each other, so are we. We are not just bouncing off each other, but bouncing off of everything in this world, and our ability to create shifts the world in and out of that state of equilibrium. We are not the only things that are doing this, but we are nonetheless doing it in very aggressively. The world becomes a mirror of the human collective unconscious. In that place where we bounce off of each other in the world around us, that place is where conversation around morals and ethics lie. Now, you may think I'm just pulling this out of my fanny pack, but I'm not. Believe it or not, most concepts of theological creation, especially those from the ancient Near East, relate to the balance between chaos and order. In the Enuma Elish, Marduk slays Tiamat, who is a representation of chaos, using the top half of her body to create the sky and the bottom half the earth. The Egyptian Book of the Dead involves Atum creating himself out of chaos, or Nun. The Egyptian or the Baal cycle, which I grew up in an evangelical church. When we read the Old Testament, they said Baal. Then I took a few years of Hebrew, and I heard it was Baal. In the Baal cycle, Baal battles Yam, the sea. The sea is a representation of the primordial waters. Even in the Hebrew creation, God hovered over the primordial sea before they said, "Let there be light." And the word for sea in Hebrew that is used at that point is tehom, which is a cognate. It's a name for Tiamat. To put it very simply, where there is chaos, there is opportunity for new creation and change. Where equilibrium generates stagnation, then entropy or return to chaos. Sometimes all we can do is organize the way we drift towards it. It is the stuff from which all creation flows, even ours. And similar to the mythologies, our first creation as human beings is the world. We created out of the light reflected in our eyes, the sounds that ring in our ears, or the smack on our behinds that encourage us to take our first breath outside of our mother's womb. From that point forward, our mind creates a world in which we live. Each world a reflection of each mind. Forest Church calls this the cathedral of the world. In Buddhism, it's karma. In Toltec, it's the dream. For me, it's just creation. For I can only know this world in the context of my experience. I only exist the way I know myself in my own mind, and you only exist in the way I know you in my mind. My image of you is not your image of you, because I can never truly know you as I know myself or as you know yourselves. As we create the world around us, there is consequence, both physical and spiritual, and sometimes our chaos is someone else's consequence, and sometimes our consequences create chaos for someone else, because people aren't inherently good or evil. People are simply groping around in a world they cannot truly know outside their own perspective. Like I said, that's just my perspective. Here's an example of how I use my theology to understand the world. Because the place in which we live is constantly drifting to chaos, it is easy to assume that the world around us is a violent place with limited resources, leading us to a mindset that tells us there is never enough. It creates a mindset of scarcity. We perceive a finite world, forgetting the inherent adaptability that comes with being part of the world, which generates fear. As I began to research this sermon, I explored what people had to say about scarcity. Because in my theology, the resources of creation are abundant and infinite. Scarcity is not part of my theology. Scarcity is an economic concept that begins with the idea that human wants and human needs are infinite, but resources are limited. It is the role of leaders to manage that scarcity through economic theory. And the simple explanation goes like this. Joe wants a yacht. That was actually the example that I heard when I was reading about this, because that's normal. Joe also wants to take a trip around the world, and he can't afford both. So he has to decide, does Joe buy the yacht or take the trip around the world? See, often the examples given around scarcity and choice involve consumer goods, and maybe they should, but I think they slam human needs and human wants together in a way that's a little unhealthy. So my question is, are human needs actually consumer goods? Usually it goes like this. Barry needs a place to live, so Barry needs a job, and Barry needs a car to get to the job. Barry also wants to eat, so he has the energy to go to work. This is before the option to go around the world or buy a yacht, right? Barry would like his children to eat as well. Barry's son has leukemia, and even with insurance, he's paying many thousands of dollars for treatment. Barry takes on a second job to pay those bills. Barry must choose between food and treatment for his son, because in our system, hospitals are considered consumer goods. Barry, exhausted, gets hurt at work, and they decide that it was his fault because he was taking a stimulant to stay awake. Barry can no longer work. Or maybe this one. Mabel and Dex worked hard their entire life and retired like good Americans at 65. Retirement is good and comfortable until Dex gets cancer, and even with insurance, much of the treatment falls into a payment gap. Mabel and Dex sell their home and move in with their children, because to Mabel, Dex's life is much more than a simple consumer good. But then there is the other side, the side that encourages us to be competitive, encourages us to be competitive. A drug marketed for morning sickness in the 1960s causes children to be born with deformities. So the drug is then shelved. Later in the 70s, some doctors use it to help with leprosy. Then in the 90s, John finds out that the drug also helps with multiple melanoma and skin cancers and is safe when not given to women who are pregnant. John realizes that it could be marked at a much higher price, consistent with other cancer medications, though it only costs a few cents to make. In 1998, the drug cost $6 a pill. 5 years later, it was $30 a pill. The drug thalidomide still costs pennies to make, yet Celgene sells it for almost $300 a pill. Of those four stories, one is the common example given to explain scarcity. Two were common stories told during the housing market crash in 2008. And the last story appeared in the Wall Street Journal in 2004 about a guy named John Jackson. Sure, they had to do more research and development to get further approval from the FDA, but one must ask the question, what is the process they used to figure out the price hike? One doctor I knew while working at Le Bonheur Children's Medical Center said this to me in 2005. They decide how much money they want to make. Then they divide that number by how many pills they plan to sell, and that's the price. But then who pays attention to thalidomide anymore? If you look on news broadcasts or YouTube channels, we hear about how long it took the children to be born with the defects to get paid out, or we learn about all the stuff that happened in the 60s. What you don't find is the conversation about how the drug can still be used for multiple melanoma, leprosy around the world, how inexpensive it is to make, and how expensive it is to actually buy. But you might have heard of a young hedge fund manager that decided he wanted to get into pharmaceuticals for fun circa 2015. His company buys the patent to an anti-parasitic drug called Daraprim that was being used by AIDS patients to manage toxoplasmosis. Martin Shkreli, so-called pharma bro, raised the price of the drug that was first made in 1953 from $13.50 a pill to $725 a pill. Shkreli did go to prison for securities fraud, but at the end of 2005, but the price has remained the same. And it took 5 years to get a generic approved by the FDA following. And I haven't been able to find the price for the generic. However, the list price for a full prescription of Daraprim is around $23,000. Then look at something else that hasn't changed, that the price of a 2-pack of EpiPens still hovers around $700. An EpiPen is a quick injection of epinephrine, and when people are unable to breathe because of allergies, let's just say the same injector in Britain costs $70 equivalent. So the consumer choice that is left is, should I buy the EpiPens or gamble on my child's life? Even though that means I may not be able to buy groceries. And understand that this all derives from concepts surrounding economic scarcity. In pharmaceuticals, the argument is that the price covers the research and development, and that's why it's high for the first few years until a generic can hit the market, and they have to charge a massive price so that at the beginning, so that they can continue to do research on new medications. And even though most new drugs involve their own raised capital, understand, in medicines like thalidomide and Daraprim are over 60 years old, they're still going to raise the price. Then if you take into account the price of these medications in countries that take public health seriously, I have to wonder, why do Americans have to pay so much more than other countries like us? I suppose I would go back to the beginning of my sermon and point out that we create the world around us. And our creation affects the worlds of others. And though a little chaos in our lives is helpful, too much can be deadly. For AIDS patients, that $13.50 a pill was already a bit steep. Then to wake up one day and find out it's $750 would be deadly. This goes beyond concepts surrounding limited resources. And the system chooses to create artificial scarcity to drive those prices up. Folks, that's not a response to resources, that's greed. It's the failure of late-stage capitalism. And what's worse, this system is arbitrary. It's built on top of other systems, and it evolves over time. The system was created, and it is a world that served some at the cost of everyone else. I think what makes me angry about the arguments surrounding scarcity are the way they're packaged. They begin by saying resources are finite, but human needs and desires are infinite. First, resources are only finite if you stop developing new technologies. See, we support a massive infrastructure around fossil fuels that could be reduced dramatically if we simply chose to. Sure, new technology isn't perfect, but then technological advancement by definition is transitional. Instead of building a mass transit infrastructure into roads and cars, why don't we do like much of the rest of the world and use light rail? And I'll tell you why. Because then Ford doesn't have anyone to sell its F-350 Super Duty dually to. And if we were on a train all the time, how would we roll coal against the cyclist on the side of the road? The other thing that frustrates me is the latter half of the argument around scarcity, that human wants and needs are infinite. First, needs and wants are two separate things. Second, I think their understanding of infinite is a little lacking. Look, give me healthcare, a home, and food, and I think whatever job I get, regardless of what it is, can take care of the rest. And what kills me is this. There's enough housing for everyone to live in, enough food to feed more than the human population, and healthcare. Well, we've already seen that work in other countries. We don't do these things not because we can't. We don't do them because we don't want to. Because we choose a stable financial system over a stable human life. And then when I watch political and economic leaders use faith to convince others to vote against their needs, I get furious. Look, I get that many UUs aren't Christian, but just stay with me for a second here while I go into some of my the faith I grew up with. There's this neat story in Acts chapter 2. 50 days after Passover, a day called Pentecost, Jesus is over a month gone. At that point, the apostles were hanging out in Jerusalem because what else are they going to do? Jesus is gone. And they heard the sound of a great rushing wind. Tongues of fire appeared above their heads, and they were taken by the Holy Spirit and ran out of the room, speaking in tongues so they could speak in their languages, but everyone around them could hear their own. And this is the beginning of the first Christian church in Jerusalem. And there's this really neat verse at the end of the chapter that I never forget. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings, to fellowship and the breaking of bread and to prayer, and everyone was filled with awe. and many wonders and signs were performed by the apostles. This is the kicker for me. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet in the temple courts, and they broke bread in their homes, ate together with glad, sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor in all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. And I reiterate, all the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. There was no I. There was no my stuff. There was no screaming about their freedom to do whatever they want, and they weren't stocking up on weapons for self-defense against the government. It seems like for a country where 65% of the population is part of that faith, we'd be a little better off. Because this community in Jerusalem understood that there are more important resources than money. One of the largest resources they had was love for each other, which can be infinite if we choose it to be. Over and over again in the Gospels, Jesus elevates the poor. He said something to the matter of, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter heaven. He told another guy to sell everything and give the money to the poor, then come and follow. These two verses aren't outliers in the Christian scripture. They are central to the life and practice of Jesus of Nazareth. And for politicians to warp that into scarcity, there's this quote by Stephen Colbert I love to use about this time. He said this: if this is going to be a Christian nation that doesn't help the poor, either we have to pretend that Jesus was just as selfish as we are, or we've got to acknowledge that he commanded us to love the poor and serve the needy without condition, and then admit we just don't want to do it. So I come back to creation. Primordial chaos is infinite in the building blocks of life. We create the world we live in through our actions, our attitudes, and our ability to choose how we're going to relate to one another. And the thing is, I can't tell you how to change a system. I don't know. I don't know how to shift from the scarcity mindset to abundance through the knowledge, to shift from that knowledge that human wants and needs. I don't know how to convince people those are separate. I think common sense does, but I just don't know how to do that. But I know that human needs ought not be regulated to consumer goods or relegated to consumer goods. The thing is, I have faith that that can change. But it doesn't mean we should sit by and watch. First, we have to take into account of our resources. This church is one of those resources. The church that I work with in Jackson is one of those resources. The building itself is one of those resources, and the people we meet when there's not a pandemic in that place. We have land. We have some very active people in our faith who have great ideas. We have an opportunity to make a difference as Unitarian Universalists to the people outside of our walls. Look, and I get that there are resources that can be scarce. But you know what we can drum up in spades as Unitarian Universalists? Love. Love for each other, love for the people we've never met that we can help, love that goes beyond emotions and feelings, love that is more than the platitudes. I'm talking about love that feeds empty bellies, gives hope through education and physical resources to those who need them. What if we filled the space we hold as Unitarian Universalists, both literally and metaphorically, not just with our opinions, but with our love? I had the opportunity back in Jackson to help a youth build a composter for the church. It was a Boy Scouts project. And it reminded me that sometimes love works through a 10-year-old cordless drill and a hammer. Love is just simply the time we give to other people. Love is the resource that is abundant in our lives. See, we can march and we can vote. We can call our Congress people, and we should. But what if we decided to use the space we take up in this world to bring love to the people that surround us? If we want to do that, if we decide as human beings to do that, it will take work. It will take time. But I know this community, much like my community in Jackson, Mississippi, needs it. I need it. And you know what? When I have the opportunity to give it, I truly feel alive. And don't tell me you don't have it to give, because at one time or another, I know you have shown others love. I know it about when people talk about you. Sometimes I can see it when you look at me in your eyes. I know that you are a people, even out there, filled with love, because we don't come together if we're not. It truly is the most important building block we have. It is fully abundant and transforms the chaos into something that could be beautiful. So where do we go from here? How do we use our love, the abundance of the love that we can bear, to build the world around us? I don't know, but I'd sure like to hear you tell me. Thank you. Benediction, is it that time? Okay. Go forth today, tomorrow, and try and figure out, how can we show our love? How can we use our love to build a world that we can all live in together?
Thank you.